Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. We got people coming in. Welcome, everybody. To have you join us for another coffee and conversation with Mission Advancement. Today, we are talking about finishing the year strong and what it looks like to do annual appeals, focusing on your core. So I want everybody to join in. We'll give a couple of minutes while they're joining. You can go into the Q&A and tell me where you're tuning in from. So just write that in the Q&A box. And we'll see where we got people coming in from. Where are we? Also, if you're having any trouble, we got Austin, Texas. Thanks so much. So happy that you're here. If you have any trouble with anything today, buffering your speed, just go ahead and close any other browsers that you have open, or if you have Outlook open, sometimes that will distract from, getting the best view of us. So we want to make sure you can hear us and see us. So if you can't, also let us know in the chat. We'll be checking that periodically. So we'll have some more people come in, and then we'll go ahead and get going. Awesome. Dallas, Texas, Chicago. Welcome. We're so happy that you're here. Awesome. Okay, well, I'm going to introduce my guests, and then we'll get going while some other people are still trickling in. I'm so excited to have Aaron Sampson, Assistant Vice President with Mission Advancement, and Jessica Rood, a consultant with Mission Advancement. And again, I'm Lacey Young, Assistant Vice President. I'm happy to see you guys again. So thankful for you guys to be here and to join us for another great coffee and conversation. It is almost October.
How is that possible?
Right? I mean, when we were talking about this topic of finishing the year strong and what does it look like to focus on end of year appeals, I was like, well, we have months for that, which is probably what a lot of you are thinking of. There's so much time left in the year, and there's really not.
Yeah.
Right. So how do you guys feel about it? Like, what's going on in your brains about the fact that we're almost done with 2023?
Yeah, that was a fast year.
Mm-hmm.
We're moving into the final quarter, so it's time to buckle down, and holidays will be here before you know it. Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas. So now's the time to, really start focusing on those year-end giving.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would completely agree. I think the summer flew by, especially this year. And I'm thinking about many of our guests who may be online today and what it's like to be in a development shop and how many times has the end of year snuck up on you.
Oh, for sure.
So many times. So
yeah.
That's why we're happy to have this conversation
today.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, I mean, many of you guys that are watching, you have a fiscal year that is a true calendar year, but many of you have a fiscal year that is, say, July 1 to June 30 or August 1 to July 31, so I think this is going to still be a topic that's going to touch each of you, because if you are a calendar year, you want to end your year because it's the end of your year, you've got to make budget and what that looks like. But if it's mid-year for you, don't waste this time to be able to get in front of your donors and to be able to present your case to them and ask for what you need, right? So how do you guys feel about, let's just talk about end of year appeals just as a whole real quick. Like, what does that make you feel? I mean, I know it brings some emotion in me, because how many letters do you guys probably get starting in November at home for any organization you've ever given to? So how does that make you feel?
Yeah. I mean, we do. We all see lots of year-end giving and year-end appeals, and it's important that you are participating in it, but looking for unique opportunities and ways to stand out. And so that's what we want to bring to you guys today and to talk about is how do you, make your letter stand out amongst others that you're getting throughout the year. And there's couple ways you can do that, and by looking and not doing the same things that you're always doing or have done in the past. So maybe considering having somebody who's been a recipient of your organization or a volunteer, maybe a board member, write the letter so that it's coming from somebody different, and maybe you will stand out a little bit differently.
Yeah, maybe it's not even a letter. Maybe you do something on top of a letter.
Maybe it's a client testimonial video.
Yes.
Or something like that. Yeah. There's so much that you can do to strategize and plan around and really take this time right now. The timing of this webinar is obviously not coincidental.
Right, of course,
we encourage you to start, now, start in October. Get in front of your donors and your loyal supporters, perhaps before other agencies might be doing the same thing. But also the hope is that this has been a part of your strategy that you've implemented year round. So you are cultivating your donors, especially those who have the capacity to give those really impactful gifts. And so this is really bringing it all together at the end of the year, where they can have that moment where they say, yes, this is absolutely my agency of choice for this end of year appeal for maybe the biggest gift I've given this year or in recent years, and really making sure that they feel that they've been cultivated,
Right.
and then they're acknowledged and appreciated at the end of the year as well.
Right.
And we all, especially want those warm fuzzy feelings.
Yeah, for
holidays,
sure. So I know, I mentioned this at the beginning, that there are kind of two schools of thought here of end of year appeal, and you have to make your budget because your fiscal year ends December 31st. Now, I know for sure when I was a practitioner at an organization, I know you both have been as well. I was new at an organization, and kind of the new person had to be the one that worked like right after Christmas until the new year, because someone might walk through the door with that check. And I remember it was December 31st, and I was the only person at my office because they were like, someone's going to walk through. I'm like, if we haven't done the work, just walk through, right? So let's talk a little bit about the difference in if you have a goal that you have to hit versus what might that gap look like of, hey, we have to get, say, $200,000 more to meet our goal. Or if it's just the middle of your fiscal year and you still have your annual fund goals, how do you kind of look at those gap goals? Erin, can you take a stab at that? What does that look like?
Yeah. So if you're, on a calendar year, like you mentioned, then I think, and that you've got a gap, that you looking at all the different strategies, a year-end appeal being one of them, but what are other strategies that you can work to accomplish to meet that gap? And so one of our recommendations would be to build a financial model. And so if you know that you need $200,000, what does that look like? What size gifts are necessary to meet that goal? And then how do you strategize and get to that goal? Now, on the flip side of that, if you're not in a fiscal year or calendar year, your fiscal year, June to July, let's say, we know donors like to give at the end of the year. Lots of donors give at the end of the year. So this is still a really important and critical time. And so maybe you set a goal that isn't for potentially gap funding, but a goal that you want to achieve. And you could do the same thing, build a model, identify the strategies, and then work towards that.
Yeah. So you mentioned something about, other strategies. So Jess, can you talk a little bit about, yes, we can send out a letter and it's an end of year appeal, but what other things can happen in this quarter, right? October through the end of December, what other strategies are there that our viewers can think about to raise funds during this kind of critical time of year?
Yeah, absolutely. I know a lot of agencies, some that may be joining us today, have end of year events or special, fall fundraising events, golf tournaments, luncheons, things like that. Obviously, that is an important part of your development strategy. You may have a grant writing program. You may have other, smaller appeals or ways that you raise funds throughout the year. But really, this is about donor cultivation. And so you send out that letter, but that should hopefully not be the only touch point that you have with your foundation base, especially those that we know have the capacity to give larger, more impactful gifts. So I would say really having clarity around that goal, which Erin mentioned, is really critical. And then being able to assign or, delegate portfolios as well as the other development shop operations, because those things don't stop just at the end of year.
That is so true.
Time. That's no secret. The end of year is just a busy time across the board. So making sure that you have clarity around who's responsible for those cultivation tasks, doing follow-up meetings or doing phone calls, coffee, site visits with donors, and making sure that your agency leadership or your development leadership has the bandwidth and capacity for that during this end of year time is really important. That is going to supplement the actual appeal that's going out.
I love that. I think that, when we think about kind of ending the year strong or doing anything strong, we want to focus on our core. Right. So we use that language a lot here at Mission Advancement, as focusing on your core. We think of it of like, if it's your core of your body or if it's the core of a tree, and that needs to be stable and strong so that everything else can happen. If you're not focused on your core, it doesn't matter what your end of appeal letter says, or if you have the event like Jessica mentioned, you might have missed it, right? So what are those core things? We've talked about them a lot this year, the elements of successful fundraising. So the story that you tell, if you don't have that good story, if your case is not something that has been fleshed out and you have shared and it is compelling and it is urgent, then what's the story that you're telling, right? Then the leaders, and we're going to get into this a little bit about like what people's roles look like, but the leaders who tell your story are critical when it comes to this, because if you are a calendar year, fiscal year, and you still have a couple 100,000 left to go, I guarantee the board chair is saying, what's happening? What are we doing? Right. So maybe they need to be involved as well. The third of those kind of core elements is going to be the prospects, who we're talking to. We're going to get into this again to dive in more, because Erin, you tease it out. A financial model is, if we didn't have prospects for these different kind of levels of gifts to get to that need that we have at the end of the year, then it's going to be by accident that someone's going to make a gift. And that's great. We want someone to, out of the goodness of their heart, the end of the year, kind of that holiday season of giving, we want them to give gifts, and you'll get new gifts that way. But one of the things we really want you to focus on is, how do we cultivate people so that, we might have been cultivating this gift for months, but we know they like to give at a certain time, right? So the prospects are really interesting in how we learn how and when they want to make their gift. And then lastly is the plan. How do we put this all together? How are we able to say, okay, board chair, okay, whoever, I have a plan for 200,000, because that's what's scary is you get to October 1st and you have this looming goal and, oh, well, we're just going to send a letter. We talk a lot about that hope isn't a strategy. Sometimes sending out a letter is just a hopeful appeal.
Right.
So I want to dive a little bit more into kind of what are the activities that leaders can do specifically so that they can be freed up, so that they can talk to those big donors. So let's talk a little bit about what leadership roles look like when it comes to end of year appeals. Erin, will you kind of start us off with this?
Yeah. So, I mean, definitely you want your executive director, CEO involved in this process, so that you're sitting down ahead of time and you and your team are working through who do they need to be talking to, reaching out to between now and the end of the year. But then I would encourage you to, reach out to board members to help with that as well. Are there things that your board can do that free up your time or anybody on your staff's time to do other things and meet with other donors? And then along the same line, are there individuals on your staff that can help with some of the other activities that have to happen throughout the rest of the year, allowing you to spend time with your individual donors, cultivating them, going deeper into relationship with them. So I think, looking at everyone involved in the organization and who can help take some responsibilities to free up time, I think is a way to involve other leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I just wanted to point out as well, so we have a couple coming in. If you guys have questions coming throughout this, ask them. We may kind of answer it live in the moment, but we're definitely going to save some time for questions afterwards. So if anything that we're talking about sparks something in you, please go ahead and use the Q&A box to ask us a question. So again, looking at how nonprofit leaders can use others to help out, so that they can be able to maximize their time, right? Because we don't need to have the CEO who should be maybe meeting with the large donor, helping stuff those letters, the first week of October. And we've all seen that, right? Or the rest of the staff. I mean, there's a lot of times when it's like, hey, we got to get the appeal out. Everybody come in. We're going to do an assembly line of stuffing letters. Well, that's fun. And maybe, I don't know, it might not be that fun for everybody, but I think that it's something to where we need to really identify how their role can be used.
Yeah.
So then the next piece is, who are they talking to? So we're going to spend a little bit more time in this prospect section, because how do you figure out who are the people that you're talking to? More specifically, what specific request are you going to be making of them?
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about how we look at either segmenting donors, but also historical giving. So if either one of you can start talking about this. Yeah. Okay.
So donor segmentation is really critical and very fundamental to this process. As we mentioned earlier, this should be a process that's going on year long.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
Around the year, around the calendar year, around various events and appeals and whatever might be happening at the agency. It should be happening all the time. And that's true regardless of whether or not if you're lucky enough to have a large development shop, or if you're a one-person shop, you want to have that portfolio and those donors segmented so you know how to prioritize your time. That's not to say that all donors aren't valuable. They don't add value and impactful giving to the agency. But of course, as you mentioned, leadership and gift officers, they should hold those relationships with the donors who have the most capacity, who have history with the agency, and who are really well connected in terms of the mission and the work of the agency. So I would say first things first, sit down and look at your donor list.
Yes, absolutely.
So maybe you have already, running a donor database list of who's given this year or who gave to last year's appeal, especially if you have donors who just give maybe one big gift annually, which is great. So look at that list first and then talk about who can handle those relationships, who has access and a connection with them. And then I would also set out kind of a goal. Do we want to ask them just to sustain that level of giving for this year? Do we want to ask them to grow it and maybe meet a specific need? What do we know about their passions, their interests, and how they're connected to our agency that might influence what we ask for specifically? So historical data from previous years, always important. And then, of course, if you have this donor cultivation going on year round, again, maybe different individuals holding those relationships, you may have new donors come into the fold. And so the annual appeal can be a really great time to capitalize on what you've been building over the last year as well.
I want to jump on something that you just said that I really loved about this is a year-round process. Okay. So while we want you to dust off the list now to make sure you haven't missed anybody, you know, when it's the beginning of your fiscal year and you're starting to make portfolio assignments, or even just to start digging into what was our giving like last year, you need to look and see when do donors tend to give. Because a lot of times when we put together development calendars, we may say, okay, this is when the end of the year appeal is. This is when our annual fund letter goes out. This is when Giving Tuesday is. This is when, and these days that are dictated by other things or by the calendar, right? But what about the donor? Some donors get their bonuses in Q2. Some donors get their bonuses in December. Some of them get, so there's different times of year when people might say, I don't really care that you're doing a big push, then I give in September every year. And you know that if you review this historical data, right? So there may be people that you know are going to give every December, November, because they have historically. But have you looked at the fact that maybe they also give sometime else, but maybe they feel guilted into giving at the end of the year when, you know, maybe there's money left on the table. So talk a little bit about how you identify when we're doing either donor planning or whatever, of like, how do we know that?
Well, I think to your point, you're pulling a list and you're looking at when the donor historically gave. But then the next step past that would be to get to know them. You know, so if you're pulling a list of, let's say, your top 100 donors, even your top 50 donors, depending on the capacity and what else is on your plate, looking at those donors and when they typically give, and then getting to know them, finding out what interest them, what they love about your organization, and then finding out what time of year it does make sense for them to give. And then that takes a lot of pressure off of you to be trying to get all these gifts towards the end of the year. If you know they give in March, you can put together a proposal and ask them in March next year.
Right.
And so that's why it's really critical when you're developing out portfolios that a key piece of the portfolio development is knowing what time of year a donor likes to give.
So we talked about this a little bit of like, there's different strategies, right, for this. It doesn't need to just be a letter. How do you identify who maybe needs a meeting or who needs more than just a letter, maybe a phone call and a letter? What does that look like for like solicitations for targeted ones for the end of the year?
Yeah, I think that's where you need to put people together in a room. So if you've got your CEO, any other development team, staff, maybe some board members that might know some of your donors, getting them together in a room to find out, is there capacity to potentially grow this donor, or who has a relationship with them that maybe we don't know about, and identifying that kind of subset of donors that you can, that you need to go in deeper with. And it could be based on the amount of their gift, but it isn't necessarily the amount of their previous giving, but what their capacity or potential could be, is how I would go about identifying who might need, you know, a one-on-one cultivation meeting, coffee, and then identifying the next group of maybe who is just voice to voice. Is there a group that maybe is in a smaller subset that if you just picked up the phone and called them, could you grow their giving?
What about if somebody has already given, but they maybe haven't given to their capacity yet? You know, some people may say, and I've seen this with some of our clients, like, well, they already gave, so they're not going to be on our end of year list because they already gave. Wrong in sharing what's happening with your mission, because things might have changed, right? What if something is updated? You know, what's a way that you can share maybe a new mission story with people? Jess, what does that look like?
I would absolutely say, don't count them off, you know, count them out or cross them off the list. The invitation should obviously be extended to all parties. And so maybe it is about that relationship. Can you pick up the phone and say, hey, you know, we appreciated so much your mid-year gift or your contribution towards a specific appeal, or you know, our summer camp fundraising program, whatever it might be. And then say, hey, here's what's happening at the end of this year. Maybe you have a volunteer opportunity that's coming up, Christmas, you know, Christmas or something like that. or another event, you can invite them on site for a meeting, offer to go to their space, their home, their office.
I love that.
Again, you prioritize these based on their capacity, their history. So it's going to depend on the level of giving, but of course you just have that connection. So there's nothing that we can't learn through relationship with our donors. And so I would just say, try to make the time if you can, to still follow up with that individual or that household and see if you can still kind of have a conversation around what end of year giving might look like for them. And again, as Erin said earlier, it may not be this end of year. It may be a shift in their giving, and now they're going to give in March or every year. And so as you learn that, obviously you want to document that, keep those notes, share the knowledge among your leadership and your fundraising team, so that you can steward them properly in the future as well.
I think, another thing that you just kind of reminded me of is that there's an opportunity to thank people again, right? So fulfillment is something we talk about a lot here, that, sometimes the thanking is even more important than all the steps that we take to ask. And if someone has made a gift early on in the year, and you can actually show them, hey, that gift you gave me in February of last year, here's what we've done since. So that's kind of like a mid-year annual report to give to somebody. I mean, I know you'll do an annual report later on, but what might it look like for you to say, hey, Erin, because of your gift at the beginning of the year, here's what we've been able to do. And we've grown this program, and now our need might have changed or grown. So it doesn't necessarily need to be an appeal. It could also be an end of year thank you, to say what you've done has changed our mission, or we've grown in this way. And all I know is that whenever I have made gifts that I've actually seen the work of it, that makes me want to give more. If it's just like, oh, we need the gift, you're on the list. Okay. The worst is when talked about how we always get these letters, right? This time of year, my name is spelled wrong a lot of the times, right? It really bothers me. So if I get something and it's Lacey Young, Lacy, I know that maybe that person didn't even really vet their list. They don't know who I am. Or heaven forbid, if the letter comes and it's very pre-printed, which I understand people sometimes have to use mail houses, but if it has that ID number on it, it's I'm the ID, that's who I am to you. I'm on a list. And having them be personal, having them be signed by people, multiple people in your organization. But okay, I want to stick on this for just a second. I'm sorry, I went off on a tangent there about my name being spelled wrong. So don't do it. But who do you ask to? Do you ask anybody to grow their gift, or do you ask everybody to just renew their gift? What does that look like for the end of year?
Yeah, so that's great. That's a great point that we bring up quite a bit with our clients, and when we start talking about metrics. And so if you want to know more and are interested in learning more, that is, we'd love to talk with you more about it. But one of the things that we would encourage you to be looking at within your portfolio is retaining all of the donors in your portfolio.
Absolutely.
That's critical at the gift amount that they gave last year, but then looking to grow potentially a third of your donors from your portfolio. And so identifying ones that you've gotten to know well, you've learned what their passions and interests are, you know that they have capacity to grow their gift, and approaching them with a very specific, impactful ask that allows them to grow their gift. And it varies based on what you've come to find out. They could grow it, a couple of $100 or a couple of $1,000 based on what you learn about them.
I would just tack on. I'm sorry, did I remember that? You got me excited. I would just tack on to what you were sharing about having a specific ask. And so we already talked about at the top of this webinar, the importance of having clarity around your goal and building that financial model potentially to see the many ways that you might fulfill that goal. So having clarity around the ask would also be really important. I would recommend, that you have that historical data that you set that goal with. And for a lot of fundraisers, a lot of EDs and CEOs, that's kind of a nerve-wracking thought to ask, to have a meeting and sit down and say, I'm looking for X $1,000 to meet this need. How do you feel about that? But this is something that we live and breathe. Mission advancement, donor segmentation, portfolio building, what solicitation and cultivation looks like, and how to have those conversations. Again, we're not just deciding one morning that we're going to call somebody and ask for that major gift. We have relationship. We say, what would it look like for us to make this ask in the future? And so ideally this is an ongoing process,
right?
But end of year is a time also that savvy donors expect these conversations.
Oh, that's so good, Jess. Yeah.
So remember that as well. But having clarity around that ask and having some data to back up why you're going in that direction for the ask, and then of course relationship. All of these are really important factors for end of year.
That actually just prompted me to think about as well, when you are doing your end of year appeal letters, it is very appropriate to put a specific ask amount in an appeal letter.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you have a subset of donors that gave $250 last year, maybe asking for 300, a specific ask in the letter. So that's where it gets into donor segmentation, and that's really critical. And you can, look at different ways of segmenting your appeal letters with a specific ask. And we've had lots of clients who see success when they do that.
Yeah, I remember I had a client once who they were segmenting so much, which was kind of stressful for them. But at the end of the day, it worked out really well, because they said, okay, here's the letter for people who gave last year. And then we want to increase. Here's the people we want that gave last year, and we want them to just give the same. Here's people that didn't give last year. And so we want to show them what we've done. And so they were so specific in it. And then it was, okay, these are people that we want to ask, but we're even putting not just a specific ask amount, but that's going to go towards a specific program, right? Because if you know that someone loves something and they can fund a project that you're doing, it doesn't need to be designated funds. You're just saying a gift of X funds something like Y, right? So I want to dig a little bit more in kind of the last few minutes that we're going to talk about is that financial model piece. Because Erin, you brought it up, and then we've kind of all danced around it a little bit, but how do we even come up with these numbers? We have to build that model. And I think one thing that sometimes, especially during the end of year, because this is a time when we want to say, oh, we want everybody to give, and we want, just to have all these warm and fuzzies, like Jess had mentioned, is we can't treat everybody the same. Right. So Erin, how do you build a financial model, and why is it so specific to put names in those boxes?
Yeah, I mean, so you typically in a financial model, your top 10 gifts are going to make up the more than 50% of what you're trying to raise. So those are those donors that are going to require more of your time and attention, those 10 gifts. And so identifying donors that have the capacity to give at those levels, a couple of names per box, because you don't always, bat 100. And so identifying donors that could give if so inclined and presented with the right ask in those gifts. And so we would encourage you to focus on those top 10 gifts that could get you more than 50% of the way towards whatever you're striving towards. That gap that you might need, or the goal that you've set, is how we would coach you through that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, one of the biggest things that we want you to hear today is this is a strategy for end of year giving, but this is a strategy all year long, right? This is something that we want your development operation to be doing annually. So when we do build development calendars with our clients, a lot of the times we'll put in there maybe quarterly, dust off your portfolio list, right? Be looking at who's your next appeal going to, because not every organization just does one appeal a year, right? Some say, let's talk to that donor at the beginning of the year and we'll ask them for everything at the whole year, but not everybody does that. So I think to know that this is something that we want you guys to be thinking about all the time. Yes, at the end of the year, it's heightened because, like you said, Jessica, people love to give at this time of year. It's not only like a warm, fuzzy feeling, it's also, it's a time when you have to meet your budget. It's a time when you're hearing it from other organizations. So we want to make sure that your appeal is seen in the eyes of your donor as a true need, not just another annual appeal for the end of the year.
Another form to really strike forward with that.
And then, we've had conversations about like, maybe it's a different size than a regular envelope. Maybe it's a postcard. Like, make it stand out. If people are getting mail all the time, I mean, some people don't even check their mail, till every other week or maybe once a month. I mean, I know sometimes I'm guilty of that, right? And so you have all these things. So maybe it's not just an email. Maybe it's also an email and a letter to say, hey, we sent you a letter. Did you see it? Because sometimes people don't check their mail. Right.
And if you've identified that portfolio of your donors, that you're calling to follow up.
Yes, absolutely.
Or to, just make sure that you're talking to them.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think kind of the main three takeaways I'm going to kind of summarize, and I'd like for you guys to each kind of give like a last kind of thought, and then we'll go into some questions. But I think the biggest piece, like I just said, is that this is a year-round thing. This is not something we just only want you to focus on in September, October. If you haven't thought about it yet, now is the time. So I hope that after today, you look down, you see what your goal number is that you need to get, start building that model, talk to your other development, professionals. If you are, if it's just you, that might seem really daunting, start with just a couple, right? But make sure that you are working on that strategy now. And then make sure you're looking at the strategy again in January, February, like all the time, right? I think the second thing is to build a model. Because if you just say, we need $200,000 and you just send out a bunch of letters, what is that? What do we call that method? The spray and pray, right? We don't want that to be the method. We want it to be intentional. And I think the last thing is to actually ask for what you need. Right. I think sometimes we miss that because it's maybe they've already given before, or it's the end of the year and it's just, we're asking everybody to give. But no, if it's, here's a specific thing that we have a need for, and we want to request that. So kind of any other like kind of summaries about how to end the year strong that you can give our viewers this morning?
I would really just reiterate the point to start early.
Yes, absolutely.
Otherwise, you're going to wake up in, mid-October or late October thinking about the holidays and all that's going on at your agency probably. And it's going to be stressful. And so as Lacey mentioned, whether you're a one-person shop or you have a whole team to delegate and assign tasks to, I would recommend that you pause now, zoom out, get clarity on what that goal is, and then set a plan forward. And we can help you with that.
I love that. I
agree. Starting in the summer is always a good idea. But what I would add or, take away is, creating that plan. I think that's so critical. And so, using these last 3 months of the year, working towards your end of year goal. But then, as you mentioned, Lacey, starting in January, creating that development calendar is a really important tool and helps you then plan to maybe say in July, we're going to go ahead and write our end of year appeal letter. So it's done and we're not going to be scrambling in September, October timeframe. So that development calendar really helps you look at the big picture for the whole year and plan out how all these strategies that we've talked about.
That's so great. Thanks so much, guys. Okay, so let's get some questions in here, guys. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and type them in the Q&A box about your end of year appeal specifically, or kind of anything else when it relates to kind of this strategy of focusing on your core. So the first one that we have here is, and we kind of talked about this a little bit, but I want to be really specific because I feel like this person's very specific. When do I send my end of year appeal letter? I mean,
there's, I think there's some different ways of doing it. I think what we see most of the time is right after Thanksgiving. That's going to be kind of the typical time. So maybe, if you want to stand out, maybe sending it a little bit earlier. What I would reiterate is the follow-up is really critical. So if you're sending it early in November or even after Thanksgiving, that you have some follow-up pieces, either email or maybe another small mailer to send out between now and the end of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, when we're looking at the calendar right now, it's September 27th, right? So that doesn't mean that you don't still have time. You still have time. Absolutely. Like, please hear me, but get on that now, because it's going to take a little bit of time for you to figure out what you're asking for, to do your segmentation and to get that out, because you also might have other things going on, right? Like Jessica, you mentioned this at the beginning. We've got a lot of other, strategies that are in play. If you have your portfolio, you should already be working that. This is kind of an above and beyond thing that we're going to ask people to be a part of. So I think, take the time to do that. And it doesn't need to be a specific time each year. Also, I don't want to, sometimes, and I don't know if you guys have seen this with some of our clients, is they put a date, and then if they miss that date, they really beat themselves up. And it's, if it goes out the day before Thanksgiving or if it goes out the week after Thanksgiving, it's not going to make or break if you've never communicated with your people. If you're communicating with your people and they know that something's coming or they know what your needs are, then it really isn't going to matter when it hits. Right.
I would, just thinking, I'm smiling because I'm thinking back to, those inevitable delays with the mail house and
absolutely
stuffing and all that fun stuff. And it is stressful.
Sometimes you have no control over it.
It propels you into a panic because you think, oh my goodness, how am I going to meet this goal? My calendar is off, I'm closed. And then when do I make the calls? And it really, as you said, Lacey, it's not about when they get that letter. Maybe they don't get that letter. Maybe it gets lost.
Right.
Maybe
they may not get it.
I don't hope that for you. I don't wish that for you, but maybe it gets lost. Maybe it gets delayed. Maybe they don't open it and really read it, but we sent it out. And then the follow-up is really
so key.
Especially for those existing major donors. A letter should not be it. So that
Right. Oh, for sure.
that email check-in, that invitation
Yeah.
to a coffee or to an event
Mhm.
on site is really critical because you can communicate just as much through that
Mhm.
and it's relational
Yeah.
versus just a piece of paper. So.
Right. Yeah. I think that, the end of year appeal letter is just another tool in our tool belt,
Mhm.
right? It's another way that we can get in front of people. So I love that thought of making sure the follow-up is happening because we can't control when we put something in the post office box, right?
Right.
So, okay, another question that we have is, it's just me. How do I do this? Oh gosh, we love you. We see you. That is hard. It is something that is, we recognize that.
Mhm.
And so I don't know. I want to say it's going to be okay. You don't need to worry about doing this with every single person. Just, I would say, start with a few.
Yeah.
What do you guys, any other thoughts you want to add to that one?
Yeah, I would encourage you, don't bite off more than you can chew
Mhm.
because it's gonna sour the experience
Mhm.
and make you perhaps a little bit more hesitant to do
Right.
this in another
Absolutely.
format in the future.
Yeah.
And really what we're working at is getting you in a position and hopefully a team that maybe you're building or will have in the future at a position to scale this strategy.
Right.
Mhm.
And that's where the most success comes from. So if you are alone, you would focus on those top donors, those individuals who are fulfilling the highest boxes, on your financial model. But also making sure that you have the time to spend with those donors that are adequate.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. If you can just grow a few,
Mm.
that's a win.
Yeah, for
That's a
sure.
win.
Yeah. And I think for the small shop that doesn't have a robust development operation, a lot can seem very, very overwhelming. But I think that if you're again going back, focusing on those core elements and reaching out to, you might be the only person in your development operation, but you probably have a board,
Yeah.
right? You probably have volunteers who care and love about your mission. So why not reach out to people who are currently already giving to you? Erin, you mentioned this before, have somebody else maybe help write the letter.
Yeah.
If you're a school, have a grandparent help write the letter and how much they love the experience their grandchild has there.
Yeah.
Or if you're a social service agency, have a program director give you a really great story of something that's happened this year. Be able to share your mission and tell that story well, and then focus on the rest of those elements of who are you talking to? You might have to, you can't treat everyone the same. So you might have to a couple letters that get pulled out and they get a special note,
Yeah.
right? Or a couple letters that don't even go out as letters. They are a special video or they are a face-to-face meeting.
Yeah.
And then lastly, that plan. So if we're not putting together the plan, like Erin has said, then we're going to miss out on some stuff. And then we're going to be scrambling, doing the spray and pray, hoping the letter goes out and just kind of waiting. And nobody wants to be sitting at the office on December 31st, waiting for a check to come in.
Yeah.
It's not fun.
Take it from Lacey.
Take it from me. It's not fun. It also is not a good use of your time
Yeah.
because the odds of someone doing that,
Yeah.
I mean, it may happen. Okay. If it happens, email us. I can't wait to hear about it. I want to know, but yeah. I think
If it does happen, start building that relationship.
yes, absolutely. Hands down. Well, awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. We're going to give you back a little bit more of your time today. If you did not get a chance to watch this webinar, you're hopefully watching it now because we're putting it on our website. Share it with your colleagues. Share it with your board members. If anybody else that that is kind of worrying about this. I know sometimes we meet together as development professionals and say, hey, it's the end of the year. What are you doing? What are you doing? Share this. We're happy to be a resource for you for really everything, but make sure that you're doing this year round, not just the end of the year. So visit us at missionadvancement.com to look at other webinars and other things. We're also going to send you a download of what we call our development health worksheet that I think is a really good tool that people could kind of plug in where you are in your numbers and really play with this. We didn't really talk about it too much, but I think it's something that is really helpful to look at. Who have your donors been? How much did they give? How many is that top number? Like Erin talked about, like the top 10 that are giving maybe more of that. And I think that for you to be able to write that down, sometimes you have to see it to say, oh man, we get 80% of our money from 9 donors. Right? Sometimes that's like a smack in the face, right? So I think that's a tool that you guys can use. If you have questions about it, reach out to us. We are here for you. We want to make sure that you guys are focusing on your core, focusing on your mission, and we want to be there to help you fund your mission for good. So thanks so much for joining us. Thank you, ladies, for joining me this morning. It's been a pleasure. So fun to always have you guys.
Thank you.
So you guys have a great one. Happy fall, in the year strong, and know that we're rooting for you and your missions matter.